And so I've done this presentation in Wallingford and Manchester, I've done it in Cunningsville, and I'm really glad to be here in Clarendon, where I'm from, and where my great-great-grandfather was from, too. And if there's any people here who have any stories, or if you hear something, please start talking, because I don't want to be the only one here talking. But I'm going to talk a little bit about my grandfather. I'm going to talk a little bit about bridges in general, you know, the importance of these covered bridges. And I'm not an engineer, so if there's engineers that have something to say, go right ahead. But this was a diagram I drew. Does anyone know what this might be? Any ideas that anyone want to shout out?
Squiggles.
Squiggles? I'll give you a hint. Oh, there it is in the top left corner. That's a hint, a little hint.
Tributaries to a river?
That's right. So this is our area. So this is the Otter Creek, the Mill River, the Cold River, East Creek, and Furnace Brook. These are the main waterways that Route 7 goes through, and hence what my grandfather needed to build bridges. If these waterways weren't around here, we wouldn't need all these covered bridges. And I think a lot of us learned a lot about our waterways when Irene hit recently, and we learned a lot about how important these bridges are in our lives that we don't really, I think we take for granted, because we drive over many. Just going from Rutland down to Manchester, you cross quite a few bridges. Some you don't even know. Some just look like the road. Right now, for Nick Powers, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 covered bridges still in existence that you could visit today that he built. I'm going to talk about the 20 covered bridges in this area that he built, but these are the 4. One is the Brown Bridge in Shrewsbury. This bridge, when you go just before that water tower, there's a water tower, North Rutland. You take the road here, is North Chittenden Road maybe, and you'll see, right when you go over a bridge, you'll see a shed next to it. That's a covered bridge. It used to be called the Twin Bridges. There were 2. So that's why I have 2 little. One's gone, one's disappeared, but they did save one of the bridges. And when you drive over that little bridge, you'll see it on the side of the road. It's used for, I think that the town puts construction flags in there now and cones. And then there's 2 up there in Proctor, one over Furnace Brook, which is called the Cooley, and one over the Mill or the Otter Creek, which is called Gorham. So you can visit those 2 right now. And of course, the Brown Bridge in Shrewsbury was renovated, recently restored. And then you can see one just on the side of the road that he built. So there's 4 currently that he built, and this star is where we are right now. So it kind of lays out what his footprint was in this area of covered bridges. When I was doing my research and I read there was 20 bridges he built, I wanted to find them. That was my number 1 goal, was to see if I could find the 20 bridges that Nick Powers built. He's kind of goes by 2 names. Some call him Nichols, which is what some of the historians have been now using. So a lot of my family members still use Nicholas, which is in some of his writings we saw Nicholas. So it's a kind of a debate that we have.
And Nichols was a family name.
Nichols.
His mother or grandmother was a Nichols, was her last name?
Correct. Correct. So we have writings where they would, maybe his nickname was Nicholas. I'm not sure. So I'm Nicholas, but my first name's Alf. I go by Nick because my father's Alf and my grandfather's Alf, and I was done being the 3rd Alf. I stuck to my middle name, Nick. And life's a lot easier now that I'm Nick. So why the bridge? Well, in this area, our local waters, we need bridges. The Otter Creek, the Mill River, the Cold River, the East Creek, Furnace Brook, Tenny Brook. We go over quite a few waterways. Covering the bridge was important to protect the wood. There wasn't a lot of modern steel and iron at the time, so they used wood and they needed to protect it from the elements. There were about 14,000 in the US at one point. Starting in the early 1800s, they started building covered bridges. And there were 700 in Vermont at one point. Now we have 100 in Vermont. There's 100 covered bridges. Bless you. And, and I apologize. 14 of the 24 in Rutland County were Nick Powers. There were other bridges elsewhere that I'll talk about, and I think is where the 20 came to. But 14 of the 24 were from Nick, and there are still some that he had a little bit to do with, but it wasn't really his primary creation, so we didn't use those. And there are still 4, as I talked about, that you can visit today that still exist.
Is Kingsway one of his?
No,
It's not.
no, but I heard that he might have had some connection with it, but it wasn't his bridge.
Timothy K. Horton did it.
Yes,
Timothy K. Horton, and the Hortons lived in Clarendon Flats.
yes,
So,
yeah,
right across the road.
yes,
From, Nicholas Powers' property.
yes. And I'm biased, as you're gonna probably find out. I think he's the best built bridge builder, but I'm just in awe of what 27% of covered bridges are existing in Pennsylvania, 17% Ohio, 13 Indiana, 11 Vermont, 6 New Hampshire, and 6 Oregon. So that kind of gives you kind of where people go to look for covered bridges. But Vermont's one of the states that folks do come to admire our covered bridges and the architecture. A bridge, in its simplest form, is to traverse across an open section, and if there is no support, this wood will kind of bow down and collapse. So you create trusses. So when the force comes into that center section, you're now delivering the force to the edges, to the banks. This is called a king truss. It's a very simple truss, and this is an example of a king truss. The weight comes down to the center, the weakest point, but it's diverted to the edges. That's where that force gets forced out to. Lots of timbers involved when you make trusses like this. You know, there's a lot of, some of this are hand-sewn, timbers and logs. It do take time. Queen post is another form of truss, maybe to go over a longer span. You have various kind of connections of trusses. That's an example of one. You can see the timbers, the large, heavy pieces of wood. Then you can get into some pretty complex trusses, some arch trusses, and that's an example. Again, these are not my grandfather's, but these are examples of the types of designs of covered bridges. This was what my grandfather built. What he was famous for was utilizing the lattice truss design. This was created by Ithiel Town, I believe is the name of the creator. And they used planks, many planks, with almost like pegs. And this design was less expensive. It was a little bit more efficient. It didn't take these large, expensive timbers. You could use kind of thinner pieces of wood. So when you go over the Kingsley Bridge, you'll see that's also a lattice truss. And this was a bridge design that Nick Powers utilized, and it became a pretty popular design. This is also a cutout of what, this actually is a cutout of the Brown Bridge in Shrewsbury, how these are called cords, and it would kind of connect these lattice pieces together. And when you drive through a lattice bridge, you'll see these pegs. Some call them tree nails. They're just big wooden pegs that they might have used, an evergreen variety. Oh, we're drawing a blank now.
Spruce?
Yes, spruce. The old timers would say a stick of spruce is as strong as a stick of iron. So they use spruce, a lot of spruce wood.
It'll dull your chainsaw in the winter.
I bet it will, especially the old stuff. This is another example of just a complex, I just found this to be an interesting, you just see that this is a lot of truss design with those timbers versus the lattice design. So Nick was born in 1817 in Pittsburgh, and he died in Clarendon in 1897. So what's that, 80 years old, and almost 80. He has two national landmarks. As for many of you who are buffs of history, you know there are national historic places, and then there are what are called national landmarks. National landmarks are pretty prized architect or pieces of history that need to be protected to protect the history of the United States, a piece of the United States, versus a historic place which might be important for the time. This tends to have importance in a historical kind of almost like it has to be continued, it needs to be protected. Nick was educated locally, self-taught, self-reliant, didn't go to a fancy school. His gift was mechanical. He said he obtained this from one of his family members, Gideon Cooley, who you'll find probably came down the Otter Creek a long time ago when a lot of us settled this area. So the family tree goes way back to Gideon Cooley. He was one of the first settlers to come down the Otter Creek, 1737, settled Pittsburgh. He had a daughter, Elizabeth Cooley, who marries the Powers. The Powers is where my family came. My dad's mother is a Powers. The Powers are down on the creek, the Clarendon Flats. And Nick was a Powers. And then they had a son, Richard Powers, who had a son, Nick Powers. Nick Montgomery, my grandfather, great, married a fish. Russ Powers was their son, who then had a son named Gratz Powers, who then had my grandmother, Grace Powers, who married my grandfather. That's where this name took over the Powers. So the Strommels and this Norwegian sea captain was taking one of his ships into port in Boston and met this gal from Clarendon who was visiting Boston, and love at first sight, and he decided to move up to Clarendon, and he married the Powers and carried on the Strommels name, and that's my dad, and his two sisters. So that's where I came from. Nick and my brother are from Alf and my mother. So he is my great. So grandmother, great. I didn't know this. I learned all this. This was pretty exciting for me. So my goal was to find his bridges of Rutland County. So I used resources, local folks, books, and his first bridge was the Pittsburgh Mills Bridge. When you go down Route 7, north of Rutland, and you go and you start entering Pittsburgh, you come down Route 7, and it comes down and you see the gas station, and you'll see a little shopping area called, I think, Pittsburgh Mill Shopping. That bridge was this bridge. It was a covered bridge. It actually was kind of interesting, like a little walkway on the side. He was 19 years old, and when he first put a bid in, the town folk kind of laughed a little. Oh, this young kid thinks he's going to build our bridge. And his father put up the money and said, if he ruins any of your precious timber, I'll cover it. So they then accepted his bid because he had almost like a co-signer to kind of vouch for him. And when this bridge was removed in 31, as a lot of our covered bridges, due to modern road widening, they had to figure a way to get a steamroller across it, because that was a lot heavier than what the sign said for the weight limit. And they couldn't figure it out, so they just put almost like a brick on the gas pedal. This is a story I heard, and straightened it and just floored it, and it didn't even move the bridge, it just went right across it. So these bridges were pretty sturdy, even at the end. The second bridge was over the Otter Creek in Pittsburgh. I don't know where this bridge was. I've looked for it. It was destroyed in arson, also a second cause of some of the bridge loss was either loss of due to modernization of roads, or people would mess around with the bridges. The third bridge is still in existence. This is the Gorham Bridge, and it's in Pittsburgh. I don't know why I said Proctor. And that one's over the Otter Creek, and this one has been restored. It's a beautiful bridge if you ever get out up there in Pittsburgh to see it. This bridge, I believe, was in Clarendon or Shrewsbury. It was called the Old Maid Parker Bridge. Again, it was over the Cold River, which is just right out here. I guess there was a lady who owned the land, and she would have a toll. I don't know if anyone's heard that. We had a toll bridge. She would ask for a payment.
It's the Clarendon Cold River Road.
Yes, that's where it was.
You're right next to the Rutland town line. There.
Just
Is that
down,
where that bridge was?
just down from the Christmas tree barn now.
Okay, that's where that was. Okay. On Cold River, as you're going up towards the hospital.
Yeah.
So is that Clarendon? That's Clarendon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're still in Clarendon until just a little bit after you cross the bridge.
Okay.
Go to Rutland town.
Kind of where that mining facility, where they do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just before the church hall.
Is that what it is? This was a bridge in Rutland, Route 7. So when you see Brilliant's Jeep on the left as you go out of Rutland, there's a bridge you will go over, and that's where this bridge was. The Leicester Bridge, just a mile north of Rutland. Again, road widening. This bridge is still in existence. It's one of the smallest bridges. I should have had the notes on it.
That's Cooley Bridge,
Yes.
just up from the Gorham Bridge.
Yes. I think it's 65 or 70 feet, 65 feet. So it gives you an idea of, so if that's the smallest bridge, the averages tend to be 85, 95 for the average size. There's still one of these in existence. It's a shed, and it's on that road I said, as you go towards that water tower on the right. There, I guess he built one bridge, and then the creek shifted. So then he convinced the town, well, why don't I build your second bridge? So he got paid twice. And this was destroyed in the flood of 47, which I believe this bridge also, oh no, this was removed in 31. So this would have been destroyed in the flood of 47 if it was still in existence. Because the flood of 47 was, I believe there was an issue with the The Chittenden Dam.
No. East of the pond.
Oh, the pond. And then it came down a lot.
Fortunately, the dam didn't.
It didn't really, right. So, but it was that East Creek, all those bridges. I think there was one by the country club maybe got hurt. That bridge got hurt. And then I think the bridge on McKinley Avenue was also hurt. The McKinley Avenue where Mr. Twitters is with that purple fence. I'm guessing this one was down here near Route 7?
It's the old,
Or is this one on Middle Road?
no, that would be the old Route 7, you know,
The-
north.
Where the
The
bridge
rails tend to be north.
Okay,
Here.
where Nissan dealer is, you're saying?
Yeah,
That, which is closed now?
there's no bridge there at all.
No, it's gonna,
It was a steel bridge.
It was replaced by a
Right.
steel bridge.
Right, when they took that down.
It would have been, you know, this was lost in 27, and then steel bridge got built, and that one got ripped down too.
yes,
So that's the Cold River.
yes, over Cold River. So really, I mean, based on my research, the creek, the Mill River, the Cold River, and East Creek were some major, waterways that we have to cross to go through Rutland. This one also is in Clarendon. I'm not sure. I'm wondering if this was, so this is over Mill River. Was it one of the bridges by the gorge, maybe, where they swim?
Probably.
Because I don't know of any bridges above that, in the Sharp Gorge. I mean, they had mills up there, right? Mill River, but
It's hard to visualize Route 7 looking
I
at that.
know. I can assume this bridge was kind of on the flatter areas, kind of where Route 7 is.
And then the next bridge is up in Cuttingfield.
Right, because you gotta go through that. This is McKinley Ave. This is the bridge that was by Mr. Twitters, which I think also was destroyed in the flood of 47. And you do cross that bridge. That's where the state police, or where you go to DMV. That's a bridge.
That looks like it's almost one-way traffic.
It looks so small.
There must have been two-way traffic.
I don't know. I mean, even the Kingsley Bridge, you always have to wait for someone. There's so much, to me, I mean, it just seems like there's so much fantasy and stories behind covered bridges.
There wasn't as much traffic.
To go from daylight to darkness to daylight. There's something weird about that transition when you travel a covered bridge. This one is at the end of the Door Drive, the Creek Road, again over the Otter Creek. Based on what I found is that Nick was ill, and so his son, age 17, finished the bridge for him.
That photo was taken from the hill across from that bridge, Fern Cottage.
Okay.
My grandfather was caretaker for 49 years.
A Fern.
Stratton's owned it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's cool. That's a pretty massive span right there, crossing that creek.
Now, there was one south of there too, from where I read that, where UPS is on Top Street.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's across out of creek.
That was Billings Bridge.
That one?
Yes.
It was burnt Halloween 1949.
Oh, you're right. You're right. And that was, I think, the Horton Bridge.
Hours before I was born.
The Billings Bridge, which I have a picture of it in my office.
So you're telling us it wasn't you? It wasn't you.
It was burned down, arson.
Then Alba.
And I've read stories because that bridge is at the end of Park Street, which is kind of a lonely area. And there was a lot of mischief that occurred at the end of Park Street.
I hear they're still there if you don't want to go back.
No, I
And
know.
that church in the background is St. Peter's Church.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice picture.
MSJ St. Peter's Field is directly straight upstream where you see the river going.
Ah,
And
okay.
there used to be a trestle across. Used to
Yes.
come across Forest Street where I live and turn and go through Calvary Cemetery and down. And then Cross, well, it wasn't across,
It's right there.
where that white line is, across there, and then across East Creek.
Okay, okay.
But that is the
South
trestle.
there.
That is the trestle. You can see the trestle there.
Right there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, neat.
And they
Well,
took
that's
down-
over the road.
Right, they took down those
Technically
walls.
a trestle then, that's fine.
It's
Okay, I got you.
They took that
And
down.
some of that structure had still been there when I was a kid, may still be there now.
Well, it was still there until they started the renovation, put the new bridges in, and they took a lot of that out.
Right. And the new bridge is moved over one side or the other than this bridge. The current one.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the Billings Bridge, if you go on the new highway towards Castleton, it crosses the creek, you know, and if you ever go down the creek road, you can actually, if you go out to the, on a creek, you can see where those stone embankments are.
You can see the Buttons Record Door Drive,
You can.
just
okay.
north of the bypass.
Okay,
You can see the Buttons.
you can, okay.
From the Park Street side, we used to ride a bicycle right up to the abutment, and if we went over, we'd be in the water.
Oh, really? Wow. This one was the bridge that's down in Wallingford, where, you know, down by, on Route 140, when you cross the creek. This one was removed in 49. I think this is kind of an iron bridge now.
Yeah.
Green
Trust bridge.
truss bridge, yeah. So bridge was reportedly haunted by the ghost of a man who committed suicide in it. That was a story I also read a lot about, you know, suicides or murders in these covered bridges. Just kind of eerie, you know, that
I don't know, they call them kissing bridges.
kissing, okay.
Yeah, listen.
Well, yeah, it could be death or love. I read stories of kids that would hide in the rafters, watching the kissers that would go through.
How do you remember that, Dave?
You remember those days. This is the Rutland Country Club. So this was the Baxter Farm, and this is Grove Street. And so if you drive down and past the country club, you'll see the guys hitting here on the 18th green, hit over the creek.
18th, 17th green was right in there.
And the 17th green was just here,
And the 18th tee all the way up.
here, and you hit over, and that bridge is still there, and that was also the 47 flood, that was kind of got whacked, like those other bridges. And I've hit many balls over on this side, which is now just trees. CJ knows that side over there.
And the second shot, I put him into the parking lot. You can hear him boom, 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 boom between the cars.
I don't know if you played recently, but now they put a brand new sand trap up here on the right. It's just interesting to see these. You can see the pieces of the land, that never changes. But how we use it definitely changes.
So how far upstream is Patches Dam? And Patches Dam all the way down to the entrance is where they stocked the trout recently.
Oh, okay, yes, I see a lot of fishermen down there.
And that's the reason.
This is his last bridge, 1880, and this is, I believe, one of the most famous local bridges, is his Brown Bridge in Shrewsbury. This is a national landmark now. The United States government, the Department of the Interior, decided to name this as a national landmark. There's not many covered bridges that are national landmarks. I think there's only maybe one or two covered bridges. And they deem this as a perfect example of a lattice design. And the way it's in the location down in a hollow on a giant boulder, it has almost fantasy view of it, of a storybook kind of picture. And they deem this to be of high importance to save and protect for all of our, as long as they can, as long as the U.S. is here.
And it's on a back road.
Yes.
And, so it isn't gonna have pressure to
Right.
be upgraded in that sense.
Correct. And
So
it almost
that probably went into their decision making.
like a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
It will always be there.
And they close out over the winter.
Oh, they do,
Yeah, it's a
okay.
flash floor road.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Is that right?
It's open all year.
They let you go through the whole year, yeah.
But
I didn't know
that
that.
at your own risk, or it's
They plow it, they plow the road.
Oh, it's maintained.
all the way through?
Again, as a kid growing up, I mean, I'd hang out with my neighbors and play ball, and I just would see pictures of covered bridges on my parents' walls, but I didn't understand the importance of some of these bridges in the area. I mean, I don't know if there's any questions. I mean, that's the 14th. I found his bridges going through it. Some of them I don't know where exactly they are, some of them I can tell. But this bridge was deemed a National Historic Landmark recently, in 2014. So if you go down there, you'll see some pretty nice plaques detailing the history of this bridge.
Senator Jeffords.
Yes,
On land.
and it's connected to his.
Yes, and who knows, that might have had something.
I bet it did. Bet it did. He has an important part of the state too. So again, what we talked about in the lattice truss, it eliminated the need for that wood joinery, that complex joining. There's about 110 lattice trusses in the US now. And this one had an unusual slate roof, and that abutment is a big boulder, which was unusual. It did use local stone and local lumber when it was built. And that rural setting, that aesthetic integrity that might stay for a long time, probably went into the decision making. I believe this is one of Ithiel Town's actual designs in 1820, when he was patenting his design, the lattice truss, the town truss. This is a side cutout. When this bridge went into becoming a landmark, it went through some extreme understudy. You know, many architects had to go through the bridge and look at it and break it apart before they said it was a national landmark. So this I got right from a government's website, I think the Department of the Interior. These are examples of joinery, you know, examples of some of the complex designs to join big pieces of wood, which didn't need to be done with lattice. This is again another cutout showing these cords. I guess they sway. They can sway almost, and so move, and it gives the bridge integrity. These were pictures from the Rutland Daily Herald, 1879. Maybe roofing slate that was used, maybe spruce that was used. Just different examples that I found. So then, as I learned more about my grandfather, I learned he did things outside of Vermont too. This was his his first national landmark. This bridge was in Blenheim, New York, and it was at the time the longest single-span wooden bridge in the world. It was in the Guinness Book of World Records, and 232 feet. It was not a lattice truss. He had to use timbers, and I believe he used an arch when he built this. I have a quick article because Bob and I were talking about that they had to rebuild this bridge. So this bridge was destroyed in Irene. This was wiped out. And we did go, my family went to one of the, I think it was, I can't remember it. It was one of the anniversaries of the bridge. I was just a little kid. And the town, this was their centerpiece. This bridge was so important to the town of Blenheim. They would gather there during different events. And even though this bridge was no longer used, there was a modern road that went around it. This was still their bridge. So when Irene came and destroyed it, it was heartbreaking. So the town, an article in 2019 says, the Blenheim Covered Bridge stands once again. And this is from the Albany Times-Union. It says, after years of efforts to secure funding, it was successful towards reconstructing the historical structure of the small Schoharie County town. Hundreds gathered in Blenheim to commemorate the new bridge. The bridge was first constructed in 1855 at a cost of $6,000 by Vermonter Nicholas Montgomery Powers. It was the longest single span, so no supports under it, bridge in the world. Their hearts were broken. And so the cost for reconstruction was $7 million. 75% was covered by FEMA, and the rest by the state, with no local property tax money used. How did they reconstruct this through FEMA? Well, after years of back and forth, because they won't secure funding for historical value. But they did restore funding, they argued, for community gathering. And it was that debate that allowed the funding to be put in place for this bridge. And it really is, I just remember as a kid, I would gather around and talk to them. I didn't even know, oh, you're Nick Powers' great-great-grandson. I'm like, I don't know who that is. But if you ever drive out there, you'll see it. It's built again, it stands. This was a bridge she built. This was a 3,269-foot bridge over the Susquehanna River in Maryland. A story that I read was he was doing some farming in Clarendon, and the folks down in Maryland, they were having trouble finishing this bridge. The design, I guess, couldn't sustain certain storms, or certain storms that could come by and it would hurt and destroy some of the bridge. So they came up and looked for this engineer named Nick Powers, they heard about, and they wanted to see if he could help them with some of their experts. And he said, well, I'm going to have lunch, let me get back to you. And when he returned an hour later, he had it drawn on a piece of wood, the design he recommended. And they were pretty much in shock because he could just see it. He came up with it quickly.
Do they still have the piece of wood, you think?
I wish. No. I did find a piece of linen in the old brick house that had that design of his, which was special. And this Vermont Vermont Division for Historic Preservation has it now. And my dad's like, you only have it for a little bit, you know that. I'm like, okay. So and besides bridges, he did the cheese factory on the Mill Road. Let me see. Oh no,
We're
it
here.
is.
We're here.
He built this. The old steeple, the old brick church. He moved a pretty heavy belfry in Rutland County Courthouse to the front of the building. Roundhouse for the railroad. First derrick that raised a block of marble from West Rutland, which, as you know, is a big marble section. Built barns, was a barn builder, and one of his famous was the, which is still standing, the grist mill down, just down the road. And you can see the Kingsley Bridge in the distance. But this was the grist mill, and it was the only mill he designed and built, and as folks can tell you in this area, it's still standing, and it fought through Irene, and it held strong.
I used to play in there as a kid, and woodworking there is phenomenal.
Well, the owner is right behind you. This gentleman owns it all the way back there.
Thank you.
Thank you. I used to play in there a lot.
And he kept it.
We used to swim there too when growing up in Clarendon. That was called the dam.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. the old pictures of the dam.
And just beyond the bridge was the clay bed. Then there's the
Yes.
middle gorge, center gorge, and then the lower gorge with bridges.
And so they had, like, railroad piers almost to build a dam? Was it wood and
We
structure?
just called it the dam, I don't
The
remember
dam?
seeing any remnants of it, but I do remember going in there and climbing up to the top, it was scary.
Really?
Yeah, it was all open.
I believe there was a dam there that was lost in the 1927 flood.
Oh, really? And Ron, I'm sorry, that's Ron Evans who's.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a 27 flood, took out wood crib dam. It had actually reached pretty much its maximum lifespan anyway
Yeah.
by 1927.
How old would that be?
45 to 50 years would be the expected lifespan. It was 1880 that it was constructed, 81 that it
Yes.
was constructed, so it was getting close. And however, they continued operating the mill until 34, 35.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Legend has it that they operated the mill by powering it with the flywheel off a John Deere tractor that they brought through the double doors
Wow, that's cool.
until Chester Kingsley passed away. And that
Wow.
was, yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, I thank Ron and Linda from the grist mill and my parents and my aunts, my two aunts. And the Rutland Historical Society was important when I first started doing my research. But I'm very grateful to be sharing this with you all and learn a little bit about this area where I grew up. So thank you very much.
Before you